A wealthy man is stunned to discover his pregnant ex-wife working as a maid to make ends meet. Overcome with guilt and regret, his next move changes both of their lives forever. This powerful story of redemption, compassion, and second chances will leave you inspired. Nathan, a wealthy businessman in his early 30s, had built his fortune from the ground up. He wasn't born into riches, but his sharp mind and relentless drive catapulted him into the top tier of the business world. His wife, Sarah, was the calm to his storm, a teacher who loved her simple life and was always there to ground him. Their love story began in college, a whirlwind romance that defied the odds. They married young, against the advice of friends and family who said they were rushing into things. But in those early years, their love was enough to weather any storm. As Nathan's business empire grew, so did the distance between them. Late nights at the office turned into missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and eventually, sharp words exchanged in anger. Sarah, who had always valued love over material wealth, felt increasingly alienated in a world of opulence that no longer felt like hers. The breaking point came during a heated argument about starting a family. Sarah was ready to embrace motherhood, but Nathan, consumed by his ambitions, wasn't willing to slow down. "I can't put my career on hold for something as impractical as a baby right now," he'd said, his words cutting through her like a knife. They separated soon after. The divorce was swift but devastating. Nathan focused on his empire, while Sarah moved away, taking a job as a teacher in a small town to rebuild her life. 2 years passed, and Nathan found success but not happiness. His vast fortune, sprawling mansion, and luxury cars felt hollow without someone to share them with. He often thought of Sarah but buried those feelings deep under layers of pride and regret. Then, fate intervened. One rainy evening, as Nathan visited a luxury hotel to discuss a new venture, he saw her. She was in a maid's uniform, her hair tied back, and her face carrying the weight of exhaustion. He almost didn't recognize her, but it was her, the woman who had once been his wife, the woman he had failed. And then he saw something else, a slight swell in her stomach. She was pregnant. Nathan stood frozen in the opulent hotel lobby, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to Sarah's worn uniform and tired demeanor. It was a collision of two worlds that had once been one, now separated by years of silence and misunderstanding. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The sight of her, so far removed from the life she once led with him, ignited a flood of emotions: guilt, regret, and a deep ache he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Sarah didn't notice him at first. She was busy wiping down a marble countertop, her movements efficient but weary. She looked thinner than he remembered, her once bright eyes dulled by fatigue. And then, as she turned slightly, he saw it again, the unmistakable curve of her belly. Nathan felt a pang of shame. He had never asked about her life after the divorce. He assumed she would be fine, that she would move on, just as he had tried to do. But clearly, he had been wrong. The reality before him was far different than anything he'd imagined. Compelled by a mix of concern and curiosity, he approached her. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice betraying the unease he felt. She froze at the sound of his voice, her hand gripping the cleaning cloth so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression a mixture of shock and guardedness. "Nathan," she said after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," he replied, struggling to keep his tone neutral. He didn't want to come across as judgmental, but the question lingered in the air regardless. What had happened to the vibrant, confident woman he had once known? Sarah's lips tightened, and she looked away. "I work here," she said simply. There was no trace of embarrassment in her voice, only a quiet resignation that made Nathan's heart sink even further. "And the baby?" he asked hesitantly, his eyes darting to her stomach. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly as if to shield it from his gaze. "That's none of your business," she said firmly, her tone laced with a defensive edge. "Why are you even talking to me, Nathan? We're not part of each other's lives anymore." He opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain the whirlwind of emotions coursing through him? How could he express the guilt that now felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest? "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I didn't mean to intrude. I didn't expect to see you here." "Well, now you have," she said, turning back to her task as if to end the conversation, but Nathan wasn't ready to let it go. "Sarah, wait," he said, stepping closer. "I know this isn't my place, but are you okay? Do you need anything?" She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and cutting. "Do I need anything? What could you possibly give me, Nathan, that I don't already have? I'm fine. I've managed on my own." Her words stung, but Nathan couldn't blame her. He had walked away from their marriage without looking back, consumed by his own ambitions and unwilling to face the fallout of their broken relationship. And now, seeing her like this, he realized just how much he had failed her. "Let me help you," he said impulsively. "Whatever you need. Money, a better job, a place to stay. I can provide it." Sarah turned to him again, her eyes blazing. "I don't want your charity, Nathan. I've gotten this far without you, and I don't need your pity now." "It's not pity," he insisted. I don't know. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's regret. But I can't just stand here and do nothing." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. "Nathan, you can't fix the past, and you can't fix me. I've made my choices and I have to live with them." "But you don't have to do it alone," he said, his voice pleading. "At least let me—" "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "This isn't about you, Nathan. This is my life now. I appreciate the sentiment, but it's too late for you to swoop in and play the hero." The conversation ended there. Sarah walked away, leaving Nathan standing in the middle of the lobby, feeling more helpless than he ever had in his life. For the first time, he realized that money and success couldn't solve every problem. There were wounds that wealth couldn't heal, and bridges that might never be rebuilt. Nathan left the hotel that night, but he couldn't shake the image of Sarah from his mind. Her defiance, her exhaustion, her unwavering determination to stand on her own. It all haunted him. He knew he couldn't just walk away this time. He owed her more than that. He owed her the effort he had never given before. As he drove back to his empty mansion, Nathan made a silent vow. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to make things right. Even if Sarah didn't want his help, he couldn't ignore the responsibility he felt toward her and the child she carried. This wasn't about guilt or redemption anymore. It was about doing the right thing, for her, for the baby, and for himself. Nathan returned home that evening, but his thoughts remained firmly anchored to Sarah. His sprawling mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt hollow and cold. The luxury surrounding him, pristine furniture, intricate decor, and state-of-the-art technology, seemed meaningless in the face of Sarah's struggles. He paced the living room, his mind racing as he tried to reconcile the image of the vibrant woman he had once loved with the weary, overworked figure he had encountered earlier that day. Their divorce had been bitter. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the culmination of years of unresolved issues, misunderstandings, and growing apart. Nathan had buried himself in his work, chasing wealth and status with a single-minded determination that left little room for anything else. Sarah, on the other hand, had wanted connection and support, things Nathan realized, too late, that he had failed to provide. As he sat on the edge of his sleek leather couch, Nathan found himself replaying memories of their time together. He remembered their first meeting, when Sarah's laughter had filled the room like music, and how her unwavering belief in him had pushed him to reach for his dreams. She had been his anchor during the early years of his career, sacrificing her own ambitions to support his. But then, as his business flourished, his priorities shifted. He stopped appreciating the small things Sarah did for him, the way she left encouraging notes in his briefcase, how she stayed up late to listen to his ideas, or how she always made time for him, no matter how busy she was. He had taken her for granted, assuming she would always be there, even as he neglected their relationship. The divorce was inevitable. When Sarah had asked for it, Nathan had been too proud to fight for their marriage. He told himself it was for the best, that they were simply incompatible. But now, seeing her struggling alone, carrying a child, possibly his child, he realized how much he had failed her. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared into the amber liquid, his reflection distorted in the glass. "What kind of man am I?" he whispered to himself. The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Nathan knew he had to take action, but he was unsure of where to start. Sarah had made it clear she didn't want his help, but could he really just stand by and do nothing? The thought of her continuing to work long hours, bending over backwards to make ends meet, while carrying a child, was unbearable. The next morning he woke with renewed determination. He couldn't change the past, but he could influence the future. He began by calling his lawyer and close confidant, Marcus, to seek advice. "Nathan," Marcus said, his tone wary, "this is a delicate situation. If you want to help Sarah, you need to tread carefully. She's made it clear she values her independence." "I understand that," Nathan replied, his voice firm. "But I can't just ignore her struggles, Marcus. There has to be a way to help her without overstepping." "What do you have in mind?" Nathan hesitated. He hadn't worked out the details yet, but an idea had started to form. "I want to provide her with the support she needs, financial, emotional, whatever it takes, but I want to do it in a way that respects her boundaries, no strings attached." Marcus was silent for a moment, then said, "That's a noble sentiment, Nathan, but it's easier said than done. You'll need to be transparent and genuine. If she senses any ulterior motives, she'll shut you out completely." "I'm not looking for anything in return," Nathan said earnestly. I owe her this." After the call, Nathan got to work. He started by making discreet inquiries about Sarah's circumstances. He learned that she had been living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, working multiple jobs to support herself. The news only deepened his resolve. The first step, he decided, was to ensure that Sarah had a safety net. He anonymously paid off her rent for the next 6 months, ensuring she wouldn't have to worry about housing. Next, he arranged for a local delivery service to drop off groceries at her apartment weekly, careful to make it look like a community initiative rather than a personal gesture. But it wasn't enough. Nathan realized that material support, while helpful, wouldn't address the emotional scars she carried. If he truly wanted to make amends, he needed to rebuild the trust he had broken. Over the following days, Nathan found himself visiting the hotel where Sarah worked more frequently. He made an effort to be unobtrusive, observing her from afar and quietly marveling at her resilience. Despite the exhausting nature of her work, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that only deepened his admiration for her. One afternoon, Nathan decided to approach her again. This time, he resolved to be honest about his intentions. When he found her on a break, sitting on a bench in the staff courtyard, he approached cautiously. "Sarah," he began, his voice hesitant but sincere, "I know you don't want my help, and I respect that, but I can't stand by and watch you struggle. Please let me do something, anything, to make your life a little easier." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Why now, Nathan? Why do you suddenly care?" Her question caught him off guard, but he knew he owed her the truth. "Because I failed you," he said simply. "I was too blind to see what I had, too selfish to appreciate you. I can't undo the past, but I want to make amends. Not for my sake, but for yours, and for the baby's." For the first time, Sarah's guarded demeanor faltered. Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away. "I don't need your pity," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not pity," Nathan insisted. "It's responsibility. It's me trying to be the man I should have been all along." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be weighing his words, her emotions a storm he couldn't fully decipher. Finally, she sighed and said, "I don't know if I can trust you, Nathan, but I guess I don't have much to lose." Nathan nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. This was his chance to prove himself, and he wouldn't take it for granted. "You won't regret this," he promised. As they sat together in the quiet courtyard, an unspoken understanding began to form between them. It was a small step, but for Nathan, it felt like the beginning of something important, an opportunity to heal old wounds and build something new. Nathan didn't waste time after Sarah's tentative agreement. He understood the delicate nature of the situation and the importance of proving his sincerity. His first step was to ensure Sarah's immediate needs were met without making her feel like a charity case. He approached this task with careful thought, focusing on what would make her life easier rather than overwhelming her with grand gestures. One evening, Nathan waited for Sarah after her shift. As she exited the staff quarters, he approached her with a warm smile and a small package. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing her a box. "What is it?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Just a set of essentials," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "Some vitamins, comfortable shoes for work, and a few things for the baby. I hope it's okay." Sarah hesitated, her fingers brushing the edges of the box. She wanted to decline, but the exhaustion in her body reminded her of how much she needed the help. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Nathan's heart swelled with relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I'm glad you're letting me help," even if it's just in small ways. Sarah nodded but remained guarded. Let's keep it small, Nathan. I'm not ready for anything else. He agreed without hesitation. One step at a time, he promised. Over the following weeks, Nathan kept his word. He found subtle ways to support Sarah without making her feel indebted. He arranged for a doctor to provide free prenatal checkups, ensuring both she and the baby were healthy. He coordinated with the hotel manager, paying a portion of her salary in advance so she could reduce her working hours. All of this was done discreetly, with the understanding that Sarah's pride was as important as her well-being. Sarah noticed the changes in her life and couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, she was grateful for the reprieve from her struggles. On the other, she wrestled with the fear that Nathan's actions came with unspoken expectations. Her past experiences with him had left scars that weren't easy to ignore. One afternoon, as they sat together in a small cafe near her apartment, Sarah decided to address the tension between them. Nathan, why are you doing all this? I mean, really, what do you expect in return? Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. I'm not expecting anything, Sarah. I know I can't undo the mistakes I made, but I want to show you that I've changed. You don't have to trust me right away, but I hope you'll see that I'm serious about making things right. Sarah studied him, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none, but her walls remained firmly in place. I guess we'll see, she said finally, sipping her tea. As the days turned into weeks, Nathan became a more consistent presence in Sarah's life. He respected her boundaries, only stepping in when she explicitly asked for help. This slow and steady approach began to chip away at her defenses. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that Nathan's intentions were genuine. One evening, Sarah invited Nathan to her apartment for a simple dinner. The gesture surprised them both. Sarah because she rarely let anyone into her private space, and Nathan because it felt like a small but significant step toward reconciliation. Her apartment was modest but cozy, filled with small touches that reflected her personality. Nathan noticed the framed photographs on the walls, the well-worn books on the shelf, and the baby items neatly arranged in one corner. It was a stark contrast to the opulence he was accustomed to, but it felt warm and real. You've made a nice home for yourself, Nathan commented as he sat at the small dining table. Sarah glanced around, a faint smile on her lips. It's not much, but it's mine. They ate in relative silence, the clinking of utensils the only sound. Afterward, as they washed the dishes together, Nathan took a deep breath and said, I want you to know how much I admire your strength, Sarah. You've been through so much and you're still standing. I don't think I could have done what you've done. Sarah paused, the soapy dish in her hand. She wasn't used to hearing such praise from Nathan. You'd be surprised what you can do when you don't have a choice, she said quietly. I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this anymore, Nathan said, his voice earnest. I want to be here for you and the baby, in whatever way you'll let me. Sarah didn't respond right away. Instead, she finished rinsing the dish and set it aside. Finally, she turned to him and said, I'll think about it. It wasn't a promise, but it was more than Nathan had hoped for. As he left her apartment that night, he felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, with time and patience, they could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. As Sarah allowed Nathan a small foothold in her life, their interactions began to evolve. They became something of an unlikely team, cautiously working toward a shared goal, ensuring the well-being of the baby. Despite their fractured history, this common purpose gave them a sense of unity that neither had anticipated. Nathan's determination to support Sarah in practical ways never wavered. He spent evenings researching parenting classes and baby care workshops, presenting her with the most accessible options. At first, Sarah was skeptical, suspecting ulterior motives, but Nathan's enthusiasm was disarming. I found this one, he said during a meeting at a nearby park, showing her a flyer for a local workshop. It's free, and they even provide materials. Sarah glanced at the flyer, biting her lip. You're really serious about this, aren't you? I am, Nathan said earnestly. I want to be prepared for this baby just like you are. The workshop became their first real shared experience since their split. Sarah was hesitant at first, feeling out of place among the other expectant parents who seemed to have their lives in order. But Nathan's presence, though unexpected, offered her a sense of stability. During one session, the instructor paired them for a diaper-changing exercise. As they fumbled with the doll provided, Sarah couldn't help but laugh at Nathan's ineptitude. "You're going to be a disaster with this," she teased, shaking her head. Nathan grinned, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "Hey, I'm a quick learner. Just watch. I'll be a diaper-changing pro by the time the baby gets here." The light-hearted moment broke through Sarah's guarded exterior, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of the connection they once shared. It was fleeting, but it reminded her of a simpler time, before mistrust and pain had clouded their relationship. Beyond the workshop, Nathan found other ways to integrate himself into Sarah's life without crossing boundaries. He began accompanying her to doctor's appointments, sitting quietly in the waiting room while she went in for checkups. Initially, Sarah had resisted, insisting she didn't need him there, but his persistence wore her down. At one appointment, the doctor invited Nathan into the room for an ultrasound. Sarah hesitated but ultimately agreed, sensing his genuine desire to be part of the experience. As they both watched the screen, the sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Nathan's face softened, his eyes glistening with emotion. "That's our baby," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, caught off guard by his reaction, felt her own eyes welling up. She nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, she saw a side of Nathan she hadn't seen in years, a man capable of love and vulnerability. As the weeks passed, their partnership grew stronger. They developed a rhythm of coexisting in each other's lives without stepping on toes. Nathan respected Sarah's independence, while Sarah began to see his efforts as sincere rather than self-serving. Slowly but surely, they started to resemble a team, working together for the baby's future. Nathan's personal transformation didn't go unnoticed by those around him. His friends and colleagues, who were accustomed to his detached demeanor, remarked on the changes they saw. "You're different, man," his best friend Lucas said over lunch one afternoon. "This whole thing with Sarah and the baby, it's good for you." Nathan nodded, stirring his coffee. "It's like I've been living in a bubble all these years. It feels real." Lucas chuckled. "Who would have thought Nathan Langston, the family man?" Nathan smiled faintly but didn't deny it. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. Back in Sarah's world, her co-workers at the hotel noticed the shift as well. "You've been smiling more lately," her friend Mia observed one day. "Is it the baby?" Sarah hesitated before replying. "It's everything, I guess. Things feel a little easier." Mia gave her a knowing look. "Nathan's helping, isn't he?" Sarah sighed. "He's trying, and I can't ignore that, but I'm still figuring out if I can trust him." "Just take it one step at a time," Mia advised. "You don't have to have all the answers right now." Sarah nodded, appreciating the reminder. She wasn't ready to forgive Nathan completely, but his consistent presence and actions were beginning to make her reconsider her assumptions about him. One evening, as they walked together after a parenting class, Sarah broke the silence between them. "Nathan, why are you doing all of this?" "Really?" Nathan stopped walking, turning to face her. "Because I care about you, about the baby, and because I want to make up for the mistakes I've made." Sarah studied his face, searching for any hint of insincerity. All she found was honesty. "I don't know if I'm ready to let you back in," she admitted. Nathan nodded. "I understand, but I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. I'll be here no matter what." For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe him. Nathan's determination to mend their fractured relationship took root in small, consistent gestures. For weeks, he focused on Sarah's comfort and well-being, ensuring that his presence was one of support rather than pressure. Slowly but surely, the barriers between them began to lower, though Sarah remained cautious. One afternoon, Nathan surprised Sarah with a delivery of groceries to her modest apartment. He had carefully selected fresh produce, pantry essentials, and prenatal vitamins, all packed neatly in a reusable bag. When Sarah opened the door, she raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" she asked, folding her arms. Nathan smiled sheepishly. "I thought you might need a few things. I wasn't sure what you liked these days, so I guessed." Sarah glanced inside the bag, her lips twitching into the faintest smile. "Avocados." "You remembered." "Of course," Nathan said, grinning. "You used to eat them like candy." Though she tried to mask her reaction, Sarah's walls cracked slightly. She hadn't expected him to recall such details from their past, but the gesture reminded her that, despite everything, There had been good moments between them. As the weeks passed, Nathan became a fixture in Sarah's routine. He volunteered to help with tasks she struggled with, like assembling baby furniture or tidying her small apartment. One day, while Nathan was assembling a crib in the living room, Sarah leaned against the door frame, watching him. "You didn't have to do all this, you know," she said, her tone softer than usual. Nathan paused, glancing up at her. "I want to. It's not about obligation, Sarah. It's about showing you that I care." Sarah looked away, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to trust his words, but another part feared disappointment. Despite her internal struggle, Nathan's actions continued to speak louder than any words could. He made it a point to include Sarah in decisions about the baby, from choosing a stroller to discussing names. One evening, as they sat on her couch with a baby name book between them, Nathan suggested a name that caught her attention. "Evelyn," he said, tracing the name with his finger. "It means wished for child." I thought it was fitting. Sarah's heart softened, though she tried not to show it. "It's nice," she admitted. Nathan smiled, sensing her approval. "We'll add it to the list." Moments like these became more frequent, and Sarah found herself letting her guard down in small increments. Nathan's consistency and patience were disarming, and though she tried to keep him at arm's length emotionally, it became harder to ignore the connection they were rebuilding. One weekend, Nathan invited Sarah to join him for a visit to the local park. At first, she was hesitant, unsure if she wanted to blur the lines of their relationship further, but Nathan's sincerity won her over. As they walked through the park, the early signs of spring surrounded them. Sarah commented on the blossoming flowers, and Nathan listened attentively, asking questions and engaging her in conversation. When they reached a bench near a small pond, they sat together, watching ducks swim lazily across the water. "This place reminds me of when we used to take walks in the city," Nathan said, breaking the silence. Sarah glanced at him, a wistful smile tugging at her lips. "Back when things were simpler." Nathan nodded. "I miss those days, but I also think we can make new ones. Better ones." Sarah sighed, unsure if she could allow herself to hope for that. "It's not that easy, Nathan. Trust doesn't just come back overnight." "I know," he said earnestly, "and I'm not asking for it all at once. I'm asking for the chance to earn it, one day at a time." His words lingered in Sarah's mind long after they left the park. That night, as she prepared for bed, she found herself replaying their conversation. She had been so focused on protecting herself that she hadn't considered the possibility of moving forward, not just for the baby, but for herself. The turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, Sarah received a call from her landlord, informing her of a sudden increase in rent. Panic set in as she realized she wouldn't be able to afford the new rate on her income. She considered her options, but they all seemed bleak. When Nathan found out, he immediately offered to help. "Let me cover the difference," he said, "at least until the baby comes." Sarah shook her head, her pride flaring. "I can't let you do that. I don't want to rely on you." "You're not relying on me," Nathan countered gently. "I'm offering because I care about you and the baby. Please, let me do this." After a long pause, Sarah reluctantly agreed. It was the first time she had truly accepted Nathan's help without hesitation, and though it stung her pride, it also brought a sense of relief. Nathan took it a step further. Without telling Sarah, he contacted her landlord and negotiated a temporary freeze on the rent increase. When Sarah found out, she was initially upset, but as Nathan explained his intentions, her anger softened. "I just wanted to make things easier for you," he said. "You've been carrying so much on your own for so long." Sarah looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Why are you doing all this, Nathan? Why now?" "Because I've realized what really matters," he replied, his voice steady. "And I don't want to miss out on any more time with you or the baby." For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe that Nathan's intentions were genuine. Though her trust wasn't fully restored, the foundation was beginning to rebuild, one act of kindness at a time. Together, they were learning how to navigate a future that, for the first time in years, felt filled with possibility. With the trust between Nathan and Sarah slowly mending, their conversations became more open and meaningful. The baby's imminent arrival acted as both a motivator and a bonding agent, forcing them to address lingering issues while envisioning a shared future. One evening, as they sat in Sarah's living room sorting through baby clothes gifted by her co-workers, Nathan brought up a topic he had been mulling over for weeks. "Sarah," he began hesitantly, folding a tiny onesie. "I've been thinking about what happens after the baby is born, about where we go from here." Sarah glanced up from her seat on the couch, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I want to be a part of the baby's life, completely. Not just visits or financial support, but a real presence. I want us to raise this child together." Sarah looked away, her hands fidgeting with a small blanket. "Nathan, it's not that simple. We're not us anymore. There's too much history, too much hurt." "I know," he replied earnestly. "But that doesn't mean we can't build something new. Not for the sake of pretending the past didn't happen, but for the sake of our child. And maybe even for us." His words hung in the air, heavy with both hope and uncertainty. Sarah's instinct was to retreat, to protect herself from the possibility of more pain. But as she looked at Nathan, she saw a man who was genuinely trying, not out of obligation, but because he cared. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard to imagine trusting you like that again." Nathan nodded, respecting her honesty. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to decide right now, but I want you to know that I'm here, for you and for our baby, whatever you need, whenever you're ready." His patience and sincerity touched something deep within Sarah. Though she wasn't ready to commit to the idea of a shared future, she found herself considering the possibility for the first time. As the weeks passed, Nathan's commitment became increasingly evident. He accompanied Sarah to every prenatal appointment, offering support and asking thoughtful questions about the baby's health. At first, Sarah was hesitant to let him in, but his genuine enthusiasm began to melt her reservations. During one appointment, the doctor asked if they wanted to find out the baby's gender. Sarah glanced at Nathan, unsure how to answer. "What do you think?" she asked him. Nathan smiled, his eyes lighting up. "It's up to you. I'm happy either way." After a moment's thought, Sarah nodded. "Let's find out." The doctor revealed that they were expecting a girl, and both Nathan and Sarah were overcome with emotion. Nathan reached for Sarah's hand instinctively, and though she hesitated at first, she allowed the gesture. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. Later that evening, Nathan surprised Sarah with a tiny pink onesie emblazoned with the words, "Daddy's Girl." When he handed it to her, she couldn't help but smile. "You're really leaning into this, aren't you?" she teased, though her voice carried a note of appreciation. "I am," he admitted, "because I want her to know from day one that she's loved." In the midst of preparing for the baby, Nathan began to reflect on his own shortcomings during their marriage. One evening, as they organized baby supplies in Sarah's apartment, he broached the subject. "Sarah," he said, his tone serious, "I've been thinking a lot about what went wrong between us, about the ways I let you down." She paused, her hands stilling over a stack of diapers. "Nathan, no, let me say this," he interrupted gently. "I wasn't there for you the way I should have been. I was so focused on my career, on building something for us, that I forgot to actually be present. I see that now, and I hate that it took losing you to realize it." Sarah's throat tightened as she listened. She had waited years to hear these words, but now that they were being spoken, they felt almost too much to process. "I'm not saying this to excuse myself or to ask for forgiveness," Nathan continued. "I just want you to know that I see it, and I'm working on being better, not just for the baby, but for myself." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." Though they didn't say much else that night, the conversation marked a turning point. For Sarah, it was a sign that Nathan was truly changing, and for Nathan, it was a step toward healing the wounds he had inflicted. As Sarah's due date approached, Nathan became a constant presence in her life. He ensured that her apartment was stocked with everything she needed, from healthy meals to essentials for the baby. He even convinced her to let him set up a small nursery in her spare room. One day, as they were putting the finishing touches on the nursery, Nathan paused and turned to Sarah. "I have a question," he said, his tone hesitant. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "What do you think about moving into a bigger place after the baby comes, somewhere with more space for her to grow up?" Sarah's immediate reaction was to balk at the idea, but Nathan quickly clarified. "I don't mean together. Not unless that's what you want. I just think it might be easier for you and the baby to have more room. I can help with the costs or—" "Nathan," she interrupted, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Let's take it one step at a time, okay?" He nodded, relieved that she didn't reject the idea outright. "One step at a time," he agreed. Though they still had a long way to go, both Nathan and Sarah were beginning to see the outlines of a shared future, not as the couple they once were, but as something new. And as they stood together in the nursery, the hope of what could be felt closer than ever before. The day finally arrived, a day filled with anticipation, nervousness, and the realization that life was about to change forever. Sarah went into labor in the early hours of the morning, and as the pain intensified, she called Nathan. Without hesitation, he rushed to her side, navigating the dark, empty streets with a determination that left no room for doubt. When he arrived, he found Sarah sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching her hospital bag. Despite the discomfort etched on her face, she managed a weak smile when she saw him. "You made it," she whispered. "Of course," he replied, kneeling beside her. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." He gently helped her to her feet and escorted her to the car, where he had already prepared a pillow and blanket for her comfort. On the way to the hospital, Nathan talked to her softly, trying to keep her calm and distracted from the contractions. Hours turned into an emotional whirlwind as Sarah was admitted to the maternity ward. Nathan never left her side, holding her hand through every contraction, wiping her forehead and encouraging her with every breath. Though he felt helpless at times, he knew that just being there was the most important thing he could do. As Sarah's labor progressed, there were moments when the pain and exhaustion overwhelmed her. She gripped Nathan's hand tightly, her voice shaking. "I don't think I can do this." Nathan looked her in the eye, his expression firm yet tender. "You're the strongest person I know, Sarah. You can do this, and I'm right here with you, every step of the way." His words, along with his unwavering presence, gave her the strength to push through. When their daughter finally entered the world, the room filled with the sound of her cries, a sound that brought immediate tears to both Nathan and Sarah's eyes. The nurse handed their baby to Sarah, who cradled her daughter with a mix of wonder and exhaustion. Nathan sat beside her, leaning in to get a better look. The tiny baby, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, opened her eyes briefly, and both parents marveled at the life they had created. "She's perfect," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her tears spilling freely. "She's everything." For the first time in a long time, they felt like a team, a family. The past, with all its pain and complications, momentarily faded into the background as they focused on the tiny miracle in their arms. Over the next few days, Nathan and Sarah worked together seamlessly, adjusting to the demands of caring for a newborn. Nathan took on every task he could, from changing diapers to making sure Sarah had everything she needed. Though Sarah was initially hesitant to lean on him, she found herself appreciating his presence more and more. One evening, as Nathan sat in a chair holding their sleeping daughter, Sarah watched him from the hospital bed. There was a gentleness in his movements, a look of pure love on his face as he gazed at the baby. It was a side of Nathan she hadn't seen before, and it stirred something deep within her. "You're good at this," she said softly. He looked up, startled by the compliment. "At what?" "Being a dad." A small smile tugged at his lips. "I'm just trying to do what's right. For her. For you." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had been so focused on guarding herself against further heartbreak that she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge the changes in Nathan. But now, as she watched him, she realized that he wasn't the same man she had divorced. He was someone new, someone she could start to trust again. When they were discharged from the hospital, Nathan insisted on driving them home. He carried the baby's car seat with the utmost care, ensuring everything was secure before they set off. Sarah sat in the back seat beside the baby, her hand resting protectively on the car seat as she glanced at Nathan in the rearview mirror. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "For what?" he asked, glancing at her reflection. "For being here, for everything." He nodded, his gaze steady. "Always." Back at Sarah's apartment, Nathan helped her settle in before heading to the nursery. Though they hadn't discussed it in detail, he had made it clear that he wanted to be involved in every aspect of their daughter's life. Sarah, recognizing his sincerity, had slowly begun to accept his help without hesitation. That evening, as they sat in the living room while the baby slept in her bassinet, Nathan broached a topic he had been thinking about since the hospital. "Sarah," he began, I know things are complicated between us, and I don't want to rush anything, but I also don't want to keep dancing around what's happening here." She looked at him, her expression cautious. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I want to rebuild what we had, only better this time. I know I have a long way to go to prove myself, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Sarah was silent for a moment, her thoughts racing. She wanted to believe him, but the scars from their past made her wary. "Nathan," she said finally, "I see that you've changed, and I appreciate everything you've done. But rebuilding trust takes time. I can't just dive back in." "I understand," he replied earnestly. "I'm not asking for that. All I'm asking is for the chance to show you that I'm serious, that I'm in this for the long haul." She studied him, searching for any signs of insincerity, but all she saw was a man who was genuinely trying to be better, trying to make amends, trying to be the father and partner she had always hoped for. "All right," she said softly. "We'll take it one day at a time." Nathan smiled, a flicker of hope lighting his eyes. One day at a time. As the days turned into weeks, their co-parenting arrangement blossomed into something more. Though they still had their share of disagreements, they approached them with a newfound respect and understanding. Slowly but surely, the walls between them began to come down. For Nathan, every moment spent with Sarah and their daughter felt like a second chance at the life he had almost lost. And for Sarah, the steady presence of Nathan in her and her daughter's lives became a source of comfort she hadn't realized she needed. Their journey was far from over, but as they navigated the challenges of parenthood together, they began to see the possibility of a future that was stronger, kinder, and more resilient than the past they had left behind. The journey toward rebuilding trust was not without its challenges. Both Nathan and Sarah carried scars from their failed marriage, wounds that sometimes resurfaced in unexpected ways. While they had agreed to take things one day at a time, the path to healing was filled with moments that tested their resolve. One such moment came during a casual evening visit. Nathan had brought over groceries and offered to make dinner. As he moved about the kitchen, Sarah sat at the dining table with their daughter cradled in her arms, watching him. "You're getting better at this cooking thing," she teased, trying to lighten the mood. Nathan chuckled. "Well, you're looking at a guy who's had to survive on his own for a while. Let's just say I've had my fair share of failed experiments." Her laughter was soft but genuine, yet as the light-hearted moment passed, Nathan couldn't help but sense a lingering tension. He decided to address it head-on. "Sarah," he began, his tone serious now, "can I ask you something?" She looked up, her expression cautious. "What is it?" "Do you ever think about us, about what went wrong?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared history. Sarah hesitated, unsure if she was ready to open that door, but she knew they couldn't move forward without addressing the past. "Of course I think about it," she admitted. "There were so many things, so many mistakes, from both of us." Nathan nodded, his gaze steady. "I know I wasn't the husband you deserved. I let my work consume me, and I didn't prioritize you or our marriage. I see that now." Sarah swallowed hard, the emotions she had buried rising to the surface. "And I wasn't honest with you about what I needed. I kept hoping you'd just figure it out on your own. But I should have spoken up. Maybe if I had." Her voice trailed off and Nathan stepped closer, pulling out a chair to sit across from her. "Maybe we both failed to communicate," he said gently. "But I don't want to dwell on the maybes anymore. What I want is to do better. For you. For her." He gestured toward their sleeping daughter, and Sarah felt her heart tighten. The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, it was all so different from the man she had once known. In the weeks that followed, they began attending counseling sessions together. At first, Sarah was hesitant, unsure if it would make a difference. But the sessions proved to be a safe space where they could unpack their emotions, confront their fears, and learn how to communicate effectively. During one session, the counselor asked a question that struck a chord with both of them. "What do you want for your daughter?" she asked, looking from Nathan to Sarah. "I want her to grow up feeling loved," Sarah said immediately. "I want her to know she's our priority." Nathan nodded. "I want her to see what a healthy relationship looks like. Even if we don't end up together, I want her to know that respect and kindness are at the foundation of everything." The counselor smiled. "Then let's start there, with respect and kindness." It was a simple concept, but one that carried profound meaning for both of them. They realized that their actions, their words, and even their unspoken tensions could shape their daughter's view of love and relationships. It was a responsibility they didn't take lightly. Outside of counseling, Nathan continued to show up in ways that spoke volumes. He took on more responsibilities, from middle-of-the-night diaper changes to helping Sarah around the house. He didn't just say he was committed, he proved it through his actions. One evening, Sarah came home from a rare outing with friends to find Nathan sitting on the couch, their daughter asleep on his chest. The sight stopped her in her tracks. There was something so natural, so tender about the way he cradled their child. "You're a natural," she said softly, not wanting to wake the baby. Nathan looked up, his expression warm. "It doesn't feel like work. It feels right." Her heart ached at his words, but it was a different kind of ache, one filled with hope rather than pain. As they continued to navigate their new dynamic, they began to rediscover the parts of each other that had once brought them together. Sarah noticed how Nathan had a way of making their daughter laugh, even when she was fussy. Nathan found himself captivated by Sarah's resilience and the way she could juggle so many roles with grace. Slowly but surely, they began to build something new, a foundation rooted in mutual respect and a shared love for their daughter. While neither of them spoke about reconciliation outright, the unspoken connection between them grew stronger with each passing day. One weekend, Nathan suggested they take a trip to the park as a family. Sarah hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready for something that felt so normal. But she agreed, and as they strolled through the park, pushing their daughter in her stroller, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. They found a quiet spot under a tree and spread out a blanket. While Nathan played with their daughter, Sarah watched them, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite put into words. "You're really good at this," she said, breaking the silence. "At what?" Nathan asked, glancing at her with a smile. "Being a dad, being present." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "I think I finally understand what matters, and it's not the money, or the status, or any of the things I used to chase. It's this. It's us." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She wasn't ready to fully let her guard down, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. "Maybe we're finally figuring it out," she said softly. "Maybe we are," Nathan replied, reaching for her hand. For the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to hope. Hope that the past didn't have to define them. Hope that forgiveness was possible. And hope that together they could create a future worth fighting for. Months passed, and the changes in Nathan and Sarah's relationship became undeniable. While they had started on uncertain ground, the shared responsibility of raising their daughter had created a bond neither of them could ignore. But what truly transformed their dynamic was the way they began to see each other, not as the people they had been during their failed marriage, but as the individuals they were now. One evening, after putting their daughter to bed, Nathan asked Sarah to join him on the patio. The moonlight cast a gentle glow over the backyard, and a soft breeze carried the scent of freshly bloomed flowers. It was a rare moment of quiet, and Sarah welcomed the chance to relax. Nathan handed her a glass of sparkling water and sat down across from her. For a moment, he simply watched her, as though gathering the courage to say something important. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I've been thinking about how far we've come, how far you've brought me." She tilted her head, curious. "Me? Nathan, you've done so much on your own. You've worked to be a better father, a better man," he interrupted, "because of you. You showed me what it means to love without conditions, even when I didn't deserve it." Sarah's heart ached at the vulnerability in his tone. "Nathan, let me finish," he said gently, leaning forward. "I've made so many mistakes, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, every day, no matter how messy or complicated life gets. And you've shown me what that looks like." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she stayed silent, letting him continue. "I want to show up for you, Sarah, not just as the father of our child, but as your partner, your friend, your everything. I don't want to let fear or pride or the past hold us back anymore. I want us to try again." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Sarah felt her breath catch. She had imagined this moment many times, but now that it was here, she realized how much she had needed to hear it. "Nathan," she began, her voice trembling, "you've changed in ways I never thought possible, and I can see how much you love our daughter, how much you've worked to make things right. But this isn't just about you or me, it's about her. And I need to know that if we try again, it won't just be for her. It's not, Nathan assured her, his voice firm. It's for us. Because I still love you, Sarah. I always have. And I know it won't be easy, but I'm ready to fight for us. For real this time. For a long moment, Sarah sat in silence, weighing his words. She thought about the man Nathan had been when they first met. The ambition, the charm, the passion that had drawn her to him. She thought about the man he had become after their marriage fell apart. Broken, distant, lost. But most of all, she thought about the man he was now. Patient, kind, and willing to put in the work. Finally, she reached for his hand, her grip steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, she admitted, but I'm willing to try. Because I love you too, Nathan, and I believe we can build something better this time. Nathan exhaled, as though releasing a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. A smile spread across his face, and he squeezed her hand. Thank you. I promise I won't let you down. The days that followed were filled with small but significant steps. Nathan and Sarah began spending more time together, not just as co-parents but as a couple. They went on family outings to the park, shared quiet dinners after their daughter was asleep, and attended counseling sessions to continue working on their communication. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching their daughter crawl across the floor, Sarah turned to Nathan with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about what our lives might have been like if we hadn't fallen apart? Nathan nodded. All the time. But then I remind myself that we wouldn't be the people we are now if we hadn't gone through all of it. The pain, the mistakes, they brought us here. She smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. You're right. And I think I'm finally ready to stop looking back and start looking forward. Nathan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. To a future we build together. Months turned into a year, and the changes in their lives became even more evident. Nathan's career continued to flourish, but he never let it overshadow his commitment to Sarah and their daughter. Sarah, inspired by the strength she had rediscovered in herself, decided to pursue a part-time career in design, a passion she had set aside during their marriage. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. They faced challenges together, celebrated victories together, and most importantly, loved each other unconditionally. One sunny afternoon, as they played with their daughter in the backyard, Nathan pulled Sarah aside. He held a small velvet box in his hand, his expression nervous but hopeful. Sarah, he said, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart, this isn't about fixing the past. It's about building a future. Will you marry me? Again? Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she looked at the man she had once thought she'd lost forever. Without hesitation, she nodded. Yes, I will. As Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, their daughter giggled, clapping her tiny hands as though she understood the significance of the moment. In that backyard, surrounded by love and laughter, Nathan and Sarah began their new chapter, a story not of perfection but of redemption, resilience, and the kind of love that endures through even the darkest storms. Did this heartwarming story of love and redemption touch your heart? If you enjoyed watching Nathan and Sarah's journey unfold, make sure to like this video, leave a comment, and share your thoughts about their inspiring story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another emotional tale like this one. See you in the next video.